evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, answering your questions tonight. Astrophysicist and atheist Lawrence Krauss. Howard Government Minister turned Radio National broadcaster Amanda Vanstone. Gene Robinson, the first openly gay man to be ordained a bishop in a major church. The leader of the Christian Democratic Party, Reverend Fred Nile. And Hawke Government Minister, now Age Discrimination Commissioner Susan Ryan. Please welcome our panel. Thank you, and as usual, we're being simulcast on ABC News 24 and News Radio, and you can join the Twitter conversation with the Quanda hashtag. Our first question tonight comes from Amy Judge.
Hi. My question's for Fred Nile. I've read that you believe homosexuality to be a lifestyle choice that is immoral, unnatural and abnormal. When did you make the choice to be straight?
A choice you maintain to this very day.
Well, thank you for quoting me accurately. Yes, I do agree with what you just said. And I was born straight.
Oh, so you didn't make a choice?
No, I was born straight.
So
all the heterosexuals are born the way they are.
So being gay is a matter of choice, but being straight, that's in your DNA, is that right?
It's a way of choice because I've met a lot of homosexuals who are no longer homosexuals. So if it's some way you're born that way, you can't change, and people do change. I've had some friend of mine who was previously the leader of the gay liberation movement and is now a committed Christian. He's no longer homosexual. So I think it is a life choice.
Can I jump in here? I have a question. So, you know, homosexuality is ubiquitous throughout nature. In fact, probably 1,500 species. My favorite one is sheep, because there's homosexuality in many species, but there's only one that I know of that particularly exhibits the fact that when that they choose unique partners. And rams, 10% of rams have sex with only other rams. Now I'm wondering if that's a lifestyle choice too.
That's just a crazy mixed-up ram, that's all.
OK, I'm going to actually go to Gene Robinson. Do you regard your sexuality as a matter of choice?
Well, I appreciate getting a voice here, since I may be the only gay person on the panel. I don't know.
I'm very happy.
I think it's the experience of most gay and lesbian people that indeed this is something that was determined long before choice was remotely an option. And in fact, all the research shows that sexual orientation is set by the time one is 3 years old, much earlier than any kind of meaningful choice can be made. I think given the stigma against gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people, you'd have to have your head examined to choose it. On the other hand, I think it's really important to understand that we wouldn't choose to be straight if we had that option, because we are who we are, and some of us are even rather fabulous.
Can I just ask you, you mentioned, or you alluded to the science in the early part of your answer, sexuality determined by age 3. What is the science? We've heard in the past about the gay gene, and by this I don't mean...
I am the gay gene.
I appreciate there's a coincidence there, but have you followed the latest science?
The science, as I understand it, is that we still don't know the mixture of nurture versus nature. But as I say, whatever that mixture is, it's determined by the age of 3, long before a choice is anything meaningful. And certainly it's borne out by the experience of LGBTI people themselves. This is something one discovers about oneself as you live through your life, because you know, we grow up learning the same things everyone else does. We're told all the awful things about us, and so coming out to oneself is the hardest part. And then I would go on to say, learning that God loves us as much as God loves every one of God's children is the really thrilling part, and knowing that nothing can separate us from God's love.
All right, Lawrence just want to jump in there.
Yeah, there's more science than that, though. There's lots of science that shows, first of all, the science I was talking about, the fact that it's ubiquitous in biology is obviously biologically based, but there's a lot of science recently looking at genetic basis of homosexuality, epigenetics particularly, not so much in the gene, but in gene expression. And there's just overwhelming evidence that it's biological. And that's kind of the thing that I think I object to most as a scientist, is that someone like Fred decides in advance or reads some book written by Iron Age peasants 2,000 years ago, before we know the Earth orbited the sun, and decides that it has to be unnatural. But how can it be unnatural if it's so natural?
I just want to hear very briefly on this from our other two panellists. Let's start with Susan Ryan. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree entirely with the scientific view on this. As you say, it's ubiquitous. We understand, we all grew up, us older people grew up in a society where homosexuality was repressed. People didn't like to talk about it. People didn't like it was happening. But as we understood that some people were homosexual, we then look around the world in every society, be it an old society, a modern society, be it an urban, rural, in every society. Is it about 10%, Gene?
Probably a little less than that.
2%. 2%. Don't exaggerate.
Okay, let's quickly, let's bring Amanda Vanstone in here.
Let's not quibble. To me, it is a part of nature. It is a part of the fabulous diversity of human beings, and we have fabulous Jean over here to prove that. But no, I think it is absolutely a part of human society. Thank you for the sheep stuff. I didn't know that. It's great having a scientist on the program. And therefore, we should all recognise that equality, legal equality, marriage equality, must be extended to people. It is absolutely unacceptable.
Ask for a brief answer, and I'll get one from Amanda Vanstone, I'm sure.
You will get a brief one. Susan and I have agreed dangerously on a number of things over a long period of time, and I agree with what she says now. And the question I'd put to Fred Nile, if I may, is if you believe that society is made up of people who are dependent on each other, who are prepared to say, I'll care and look after this person, as opposed to wanting the state to do it, why in God's name wouldn't you be in favour of gay marriage?
I'll pause you on that thought. We've actually got a question about this, and we'll take it right now.
Well, have the answer.
Yeah, I know, but you don't get to ask questions. The people in the audience do. So the next question comes from David Fuad.
My question is directed towards Jean Robinson. Jean, being a bishop, a leader, and an example for many Christians in the world, how can you encourage the act of homosexuality when it has been condemned numerous times in the Bible, being called unnatural, unrighteous, lawless, an abomination, and shameless? And being a Christian, how can you encourage gay marriage when Christ himself said that God made them male and female, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife?
Amen to that.
Faithful Christians, many of us, progressive Christians, understand the Bible in its context. The whole notion of sexual orientation is only about 140 years old. It was at the latter part of the 19th century that the notion that a certain minority of us would be born affectionately oriented towards people of the same gender rather than the opposite gender, it's a new concept. You can't take a modern-day concept, read it back into an ancient scripture without doing violence to the scripture. The three-day seminar on this, constricted down to one or two sentences, is that the Bible is not talking about what we're talking about today, which is faithful, monogamous, lifelong intentioned relationships between two people of the same gender. As far as the Christian community and my role in it as a bishop, it seems to me that I'm doing far more for the faith in trying to live a life of integrity, being honest in a way that all the gay bishops before me were not honest. And standing up for who I am, which is a child of God who happens to be gay and is absolutely convinced of God's love for me.
Briefly, Jean, briefly, in your book, you actually make the case that you support marriage as an institution. In fact, you want more people to be married because that will make the institution stronger, including
the first line in my book is, I believe in marriage. I do. I witnessed my own parents 66 years married, and hope I live long enough to achieve that. I'm up to 25 years so far with my partner and now my husband. It's interesting to me, and I would join you in this, that I can't imagine that the conservatives aren't all for this. For years they accused us of shallow relationships and promiscuity, and here we've got people wanting to pledge themselves in faithful commitment to one another and in support of the institution of marriage.
Okay, let's hear from Fred Nile then, because it seems you do agree on one thing: the institution of marriage is important. He just wants more people to get married.
Well, he doesn't recognise the truth that his actions will undermine marriage. Marriage, the way God intended it, was to be between a male and a female. That's the institution of marriage. It can't be two men or two women, and you're undermining the institution. And I'm in favour of the institution. I was married for 53 years. I want to uphold the institution of marriage. And I know people arguing what you're saying, where you're for marriage, so you want homosexuals to get married, but you actually are torpedoing the institution of marriage and undermining it.
I think what's torpedoing the institution of marriage is a very high number of heterosexual people who are jumping out of it.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get to talk more about marriage, but I want to go back to the question a little bit, because it seems to me I actually kind of agree with him a little bit. I can't quite understand why you stay in the church. I mean, look, you read the Bible and it's pretty explicit. There's that wonderful section, really heartwarming, where Lot is visited by these angels, men, and the townspeople want to take them on rape. And he says, no, rape my daughters instead. And, it's one of those wonderful parts of the Bible. And I'm just, when you read all of this, and, you read that men who lay together should be killed and all that, you can interpret it all you want, but you're sort of picking and choosing, I think. You decide you want to be a Christian, and you throw out the stuff you don't like I think most Christians do, actually. Throw out the stuff you don't like, keep the stuff you do. Why not just throw out the whole thing and just be happy and love people and be gay?
It's a fair question. You can answer that.
Yeah, I'm actually delighted to respond to that question. It's the experience of the living God in my own life. That's why I stick with it. That's why I believe that the church, the synagogue, the mosque can constantly reform itself, because God's will is being revealed to us over time. We're constantly understanding better God's will, and this is one of those places where we're changing what we have believed for 2,000 or 3,000 years. I believe that Scripture is holy in the sense that it is the story of people who have had an experience with the living God, and we read it in order to know where to look in our own lives for an experience of the living God. And so I do believe in it. The church has got a lot to apologize for, but then again, don't we all? And I believe that this is the way to discern God's will, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Okay, I'm just going to go to Fred Nile here. What makes you think that you understand God's will and he, the bishop, does not?
Because I take as my authority Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and also the living Word, and I believe that God gave to us the written Word, the Holy Bible. And as a bishop, you would know, the church for 2,000 years and longer has upheld marriage as it is, and has also said that homosexuality is immoral, unnatural, and so on. Well, so you are going against the teaching of the church.
So Large brings up.
So you should be ashamed to be a bishop and going against the teaching of the church.
I'm just going to interrupt because
I'm agreeing with the atheist over there.
Just hold on. The Bible is always open to interpretation. We've actually got a question on this subject from Rebecca Chrysler.
So why is it that when the Bible contains something that's obviously ethically wrong, for example, happy are those who seize your children and smash them against a rock, which is in Psalm 137, religious people claim that the Bible is just a guideline and shouldn't be taken literally. So why is it the second Psalm brings up gay marriage, they use the Bible as a concrete reason to oppose it?
Yeah, Fred Nile. The Bible has many messages, I think, is part of the point there, including some very violent ones.
Yes, well,
as you heard earlier from Lawrence.
Well, we
Krauss.
understand that you have the Old Testament and the New Testament. And Jesus made it very clear that he had replaced the Old Testament, with the emphasis it did have, with the New Testament, and said, I have a new commandment for you, to love one another. And so Jesus brought in a completely new emphasis, which is what I follow as a Christian.
But can I just make the point that Gene and his partner love one another? Isn't that following the teaching?
Well, Gene has to answer to God, not to Fred Nile.
And I'm delighted to answer to God for that.
And I am worried, because there is a passage in the Bible with Jesus where he said that in the last days some people will come to me and start saying, Lord, 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 and think that they're on the right side. And he said, I will say, depart from me, I never knew you. So you must be very careful where you are in your own personal salvation and your relationship with God.
I'd actually quite like to...
doubt as a motivator. I mean, that's you're saying that people might choose to follow a particular path because they've been frightened by the scripture that says if you don't, you might not get into heaven. Well, frankly, that's not any heaven I want to get into. My grandmother used to say, if you are nice to people every day, because she didn't make us go to Sunday school when we stayed with her, she said, if you're nice to people every day, other than to defend yourself, because that's, you know, a box on's fair enough then, you'll get into any heaven worth getting into. Now, how could you disagree with that?
Guys, can I Lawrence, I know you want to jump in, but
only that is different from the teaching of the New Testament.
Well, can I just...
So you can be a nice person your whole life and still not get into heaven.
That's right.
It's not worth going there.
Yes. On this table, we
to have eternal life, you have to believe in Jesus Christ as Saviour.
Excuse me, Fred,
it's only one way.
So I will give you a chance to answer this, but on this table we've got two different interpretations of the New Testament. We've got Gene's, and I'd like
Maybe
to...
three.
Yes,
two theological interpretations. So, Gene, what did Jesus say about homosexuality?
Jesus said nothing about homosexuality. This was also, I mean, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say and what I'm not saying. This is a man who remained single throughout his lifetime in a culture that virtually demanded marriage. He spent most of his time with 12 men. He singled 3 of them out for special leadership. And one of them is known as the beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. I think to solicit Jesus into the notion of nuclear families, husband to wife and 2.2 children, begs the question of the fact that Jesus actually had a very kind of alternate lifestyle. I'm not saying he was gay. I'm not saying that he ever had sex with anyone. I'm just saying that this is a man who lived outside the normal boundaries of his own culture and knew about a family of choice. When his mother and brothers came to fetch him once at a house and he was told they were outside, he said, who are my mothers and brothers? They're the ones who do the will of God. So I think we have lots of room to wonder about this Jesus who was always reaching out to the marginalized, to the oppressed, and was always advocating for them, usually against the moral arbiters of that day.
Okay, now Fred, there's the other interpretation of the New Testament.
Yes.
According to Gene, Jesus said nothing about homosexuality.
Yes, well, he's misrepresenting what Jesus said.
What did he say?
Jesus, for example, did say what marriage is. When they were asking him, he said, marriage is where a man shall leave his mother and father and shall cleave to his wife, the two shall become one. 2 men cannot become one, 2 women cannot become one. But God has made us biologically so a male and a female can become one and complement each other. So that's the first thing. There is also a code word in the New Testament, and Jesus often referred to Sodom. And everybody, and it's been all quoted here already, you quoted the story. So every Jewish listener knew what Jesus was referring to when he said, it's going to be worse for you than it was for Sodom. He only had to use the word Sodom. They all knew what the story was about, where the men wanted to have sex with these 2 attractive, I assume they were attractive angels, male angels.
Actually, Fred, you're quite wrong about that. If you go back and read, you'll see that Jesus said that the sin of Sodom was its ill treatment of the poor.
Well, let me jump in and say, I mean, we're all pretending Jesus was this great guy, but let's step back and say, this guy also seemed to say, if you don't believe in me, you know what? You'll be condemned to you won't get to heaven. You'll be condemned eternally to pain and worse than the people in Sodom and Gomorrah just for not believing in me. What kind of God would you? I mean, it's what kind of love is that? What kind of love? People who are loving, caring, good people will go to hell for all eternity for choosing to use their brains. And I find that just. Okay.
I want to hear from Susan, who's been left out a little bit on the end there.
Well, I'm not gay. I'm not married. Not a great fan of marriage. I have been married, so maybe I haven't got a lot. Maybe I haven't got a lot to say. But I've got this. I was brought up a Catholic, and our religious education was really the New Testament, not the Old Testament, and the parts of that I remember very fondly, and indeed I have brought into my political life and my human rights work, is not whether Jesus said Sodom or it's feeding the sick. It's healing feeding the hungry, healing the sick, even raising someone from the dead, which is the ultimate healing. It's throwing the usurers out of the temple. It's including women in the conversation he was having with his disciples. It's saying, suffer the little children. They're the things that I think are worthwhile, even though I'm not signed up to any religion these days, Lawrence, because I think they're things, we can all incorporate. But this argument endlessly about, Fred, that you're going about this was in the Old Testament. I mean, we're here now. It's 2013. We've got responsibilities to each other. We've got responsibilities to the people Jesus Christ apparently looked after. Let's go for it.
Yeah, but I'll just to sort of end this part of the discussion, can I just bring Fred back in here? I mean, are you worried if you create a kind of exclusive world where your version of Christianity leaves out people like Jean, that's actually bad?
Well, I'm not leaving him out. He's excluding himself. I haven't left him out. I want him to come in.
In fact, he's not excluding himself in the sense that he is a bishop with his own congregation.
I'd like at the end of this program to say I believe in what you've just been saying, Fred.
But are all the people
who
also believe in God but from other religions are also excluded, I presume? So basically you're an atheist about all the other religions. It's just yours that you're not. Is that correct?
I leave it to God. He's the judge. And he will judge each person.
But are they excluded if you're not a Christian, but you say you're a very faithful Muslim or a faithful Jew? Are you excluded?
I'm just saying God will judge them, not me.
Okay.
And I know God is a loving God, and God will be fair, and He's dealing with each individual.
We've got a questioner from the floor who put up his hand. I'll just quickly get to you.
Hi there, Fred. I want to ask you, when the suicide rate is so high in LGBT teens, when you use such hateful and disgusting language about them, do you not feel, or I think maybe you should, feel slightly responsible for some of this that goes on?
I must object to that, because I will give you $1,000 if you can find anywhere where I've said anything which is hateful or vicious about homosexuals.
Okay, I think it is time to move on.
You won't find it.
I think it's time to move along. Our next question, and it's on a different subject, comes from Charles Northcote.
Panel, good evening. In light of recent events in the UK, namely the horrific terrorist murder of the British soldier Lee Rigby, we have terrorism coming from within. Let me quote the word of Ayatollah Khomeini. Islam makes it incumbent upon all males to prepare themselves for the conquest of countries so that the writ of Islam, Sharia, is obeyed by every country in the world. Those who know nothing about Islam pretend it counsels against war. Those are witless. Islam says kill all unbelievers just as they would kill you. How do you propose to make a stand against such radical behaviour and belief systems?
Lawrence Krauss, let's start with you.
Well, I think the way you make a stand is the way you make a stand against all religious nonsense. You point out there's nothing. Actually, Islam, I don't think, is that different than Christianity. It's 500 years behind the game, but Christianity was doing the same stuff 500 years ago. I think you have to point. I think you have to point out that we all have a common humanity, and that the myths and silly stories in Islam are just as silly as the ridiculous stories in the Bible. And that we teach kids to, in fact, get their beliefs to conform to the evidence of reality rather than deciding in advance what is right before they even ask the question. So education, I'm an educator, and I said it before, but if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And to me, it's education. You educate people. What you're talking about is really ignorance. I think you can control people by keeping them ignorant. And you see the Taliban doing it in Afghanistan. They have madrasas that get kids to memorize sections of the Quran instead of teaching them mathematics. And so the more knowledge you have about the world, the less likely you are to that kind of radical hatred, it seems to me.
Amanda Vanstone, the question began by talking about... Thank you. The question began by talking about the murder of that young trooper in a suburb in London, hacked to pieces by two people who were trying to make a political point. How do you actually deal with that?
Well, I suspect British people can deal with it better than legislation or intelligence agencies can. And if you were there, I think the best thing to do is find your Muslim friends. If you've got some, if you haven't, find some and make friends with them. And find your friends who've come from Africa or who the children have come from Africa and go out to dinner with them. Make a public statement that not everybody is like that. I think if you let the media stories of this push us into it's us versus them, that's what you'll get. What you have to do is say, no, it's not us versus them. It's all of us over here against those few crazy nutters.
Susan Ryan.
Well, I couldn't put it better than Amanda has. It is about embracing and including people, and I think we do that very well in Australia. Not well enough, we've still got some issues, but the more we provide every community opportunity to people of Islamic faith coming to live in Australia, the better it will be. And the other thing that I always say helps in any situation about religion or terrorism is educate the women. The education of women is the great solution to many a problem.
Yeah,
I agree with that, absolutely.
Fred, just a quick comment. I object to your comparison of the Islamic religion and those quotes with the New Testament. You'll find nothing in the New Testament which would encourage you to kill anybody.
No, I didn't say it was violent. I just said it was silly.
No, but you were given the impression, as you said, 500 years ago, what happened 500 years ago was not based on what the New Testament teaches. It's based on the Crusades and what
Well,
men
I mean,
think.
I actually think the worst crime in the New Testament is the crucifixion of Jesus. It seems to me amazing that you solve the problems of the world by having someone sacrifice, by having this person violently tortured and sacrificed for the sins of a non-existent forebear who made the mistake of taking an apple from a rib woman. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Right, Jesus was dying for all of our sins, your sins and my sins. And the
Fred,
sins.
we went a bit off topic there because the question was actually about terrorism and how to deal with it, and particularly Islamic extremism.
Well, I'm very concerned about Islam, and I've spoken on this before. And what is being quoted is correct. It is in the Quran. So we have to have the
I don't think it was a
Islamic,
quote from the
Muslim,
Quran. That was a quote from Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yes, but he's quoting the Quran. There are verses in the Quran that say, cut off the hands of your enemies, their legs, crucify them, and so on.
Yes.
And these fanatics can find those verses in the Quran, as bin Laden did, to justify their terrorism. Now, I believe the Islamic
Just like, in
leaders,
fact, you could take that psalm, which is out of the Old Testament, which suggests you could dash babies' heads against rocks as part of a revenge against the Babylonians.
that's the point I'm making, that's no longer relevant in the New Testament period. Jesus said that was the Old Covenant. We're now under the New Covenant.
Okay,
He says, love your enemies.
All right, I'm going to interrupt us just for a moment because we've got another question on this topic. It's from Rashad Farid.
Last week, a British soldier was brutally murdered outside of his barracks. On May 2nd in Birmingham, a 72-year-old man was viciously stabbed. He was a Muslim returning home after prayer at his local mosque, and police deemed it racially motivated. Why is the attack on the British soldier considered an act of terrorism, while the other is just an act of racism? Do you blame the religion or the individuals who committed it?
Jean Robinson, let's start with you.
Rashad, I believe is your name? Yes. I think you're absolutely right to point out this discrepancy. I think it points to prejudice and bias on our part and the part of the media. Both are serious and both need to be taken seriously. I think we have extremists in every religion, and Christians should be very humble about pointing out someone else's extremism, and we have just as many Christians would love to see a theocracy as Muslims or Jews. Actually, the Jews are better on this than any of us. They have rarely ever wanted to take over the world. the way some Christians and Muslims have done. I think that one of the ways in which we can respond to this kind of terrorism is to encourage the middle ground of all the religions to stand up and speak. We have let the extremists own the airwaves, own the blogs, own the social media, and those people of peace in all of the world religions and those of no religion need to stand up and speak for the vast majority of us who find all of those crimes heinous.
Fred, you've heard the comparison. 72-year-old Muslim man returning from prayers, stabbed to death in the street, and the comparison is made with the killing of the soldier who was hacked to death in the street. The difference is, I suppose, that the killers in that case stood in front of phone cameras and told their reasons. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm just as critical of both the individuals who carried out those horrific murders. I've got no interest in supporting that, and I follow what Jesus said, love your enemies. And that's a central teaching of the Christian faith. It's not a source of violence against people at all.
Well, who are the enemies in this case? I just don't know who the enemy. Are you saying the Islam is the enemy?
Whoever's attacking you, like in Cairo, burning down the cathedral, that's your enemy. So you still love them, but you try to change that society.
Part of the problem, and here is that, and I agree with, of course, what you just said, but that we label people. And religion is a wonderful way of labeling people and making us versus them. And so we don't see the people. We see them being Christians or Muslims. And we hate them because of that. And so that's one other reason why I think religion gets in the way, because it causes us to stereotype people instead of seeing people as individuals with a common humanity.
But can I just interrupt there? Because in this particular case, the case of the two men who killed in a suburban street, hacked to death, literally, a British soldier, we did see them, actually. We saw them as individuals, and they used phone cameras rather uniquely immediately after the event, still covered in blood, to explain their reasons. How do you deal with that?
Look, the point is that obviously they were driven by hate. But my point was that they were not killing that poor young man because they knew him, they knew anything about him. They'd already labeled him by a bunch of labels: military, representative of a Christian state that had done supposed atrocities against Islam, and that's the kind of labeling that leads people to be able to do these heinous acts because they no longer see people as people, but representative of something they hate. And that, to me, is one of the real problems of the us versus themness of religious groups that cause other people to no longer be people.
Amanda, just taking the young man's question up there, I mean, he's asking whether the two things are fundamentally different. The stabbing to death, a racist attack of an elderly Muslim man, and the killing with knives and hatchets of the British soldier.
I don't know the details of the second case, but they would seem, on what you've said, to be inextricably related. I mean, the more you have people saying Muslims want to go and kill everybody, the more you have whipping everyone else up into a frenzy of fear and apprehension and a feeling that they must deal with this. So it goes back to what my granny said: if you lead a good life, you'll get into any heaven worth getting into. And it follows that you know, if I get up to heaven and St. Peter says, gee, you made a mistake, you went to the Anglican church, you should have gone to a Catholic one, or you should have gone to some other church, I'm going to be bitterly disappointed, because I went to a Christian school and I was taught the need to be a good person and not judge people, as you say, on labels. It doesn't matter if they're Catholic or Anglican or Muslim or whatever. What matters is whether they are a good and decent person. And that's how we should be dealing with each other. And once you start this, well, they're Muslims, they want to kill you, well, you're separating it out, you're getting into us and them, and you will have battles, ugly ones, where people will be killed.
Steve Weinberg, who's a physicist and also an atheist, said that there are good people and there are bad people. And good people do good things and bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion.
Okay, so
may I just jump in here and
there's a young
say
man there
that-
with his hand up in the air. We'll just get a microphone over to you. Just come in, Gene. Go ahead.
Let me just ask a quick question. I think
rather
the
you didn't
labeling.
ask a question.
Oh no! Then I'll make a statement.
Yes.
Okay.
That's all right.
An answer.
Which is, I think we all have to be careful of labeling, and I believe that you quite often make the distinction between atheists and religionists as being a kind of label.
Okay. I'm sorry, but I'm going to go back to the questioner in the front row there. Go ahead.
Professor Krauss,
Yeah.
you say religion is the only way to make a good person do a bad thing. But don't you think you could turn that around and say, well, religion helps a lot of bad people to just be better and do good things? I mean, speaking for myself, I'm not a great person, but I'm a lot better because of the influence of Christianity has on me.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you can't deny that religion serves many good purposes in society. There's no doubt it brings people consolation at hard times. It brings people together in groups often and gives support groups. So, it is indeed stereotypical to try and label it. My point is that we pretend that religion only is the basis of morality and leads to good things, and sometimes it does. But a lot of the times, and again, if you read the Old Testament, it's one of the most immoral books ever written.
Okay, I'm going to go to another question.
Very quickly, with respect, I think religion's the only way you can have an objective set of moral values.
Why?
And if you look, well, what else would you suggest as
Reason.
an objective set?
Reason.
Okay. Thank you. We'll take that as a comment, and we'll go to our next questioner. It's Eddie Ozels.
Gene Robinson, American comedian Robin Williams has suggested that Episcopalians are Catholic light, L-I-T-E, all the rituals but only half the guilt. It seems he's saying that there is no God in all this, it's all about the bells and smells. Can you defend the existence of God to someone like Lawrence Krauss?
You can he's sitting right there. You can have a crack at it.
I have no need to convince Lawrence Krauss of anything. I am delighted to be his colleague, and I'm also delighted to affirm the appropriate role of reason. I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a both and. I think we can be reasonable, logical, scientific people and be religious. There is no conflict between religion and science. Science tells us what happens, and religion tells us who made it happen. It's God who thought up the Big Bang. It's God who thought up evolution.
How do you know that? How do you know that? I don't know that.
I don't know that.
Yeah, okay, good.
I believe that.
Oh, okay.
And here's my point would be, my particular believing of that allows me to treat people with, I shoot for infinite respect of one another. I derive my own values from my own experience of God, and it motivates me to be the kind of better person that Amanda's talking about. So for me, that works. I don't have a need to convince you of that, and I can also respect.
I think it's probably a good idea you don't have a need to do it, because the truth is, I don't think you did. Because he's not going to be convinced by
No, but I think you'd accept, and I'm sure you'd accept the fact that I can feel exactly the same way about respecting people, and it's all based on the fact that I don't need to buy into those myths. I can come to the conclusions based on the evidence of reality and reason, and decide it's reasonable to treat you with respect, because it leads to a happier for me and happier for you. So it's not as if I need that God to come to that conclusion. God is just redundant. It's not necessary.
All right. Now, Amanda Van Steen in the middle of that conversation.
Yeah, well, look, I have an admission to make. I think the young man in the front, has a point to make. I'm disappointed in all of the churches. I think they've let us down in a whole variety of ways. But I do think there is a place for someone, certainly other than the state, and certainly other than just Rafferty's rules, to come up with a set of moral values, or a number of sets of moral values. I don't have the same confidence in reason and rationale. There's plenty of books you can read to show that cross-culturally you can come to different conclusions, and I don't think history shows that men left to their own devices always do good things. So the churches, in my mind, have had a role to play in guiding people as to what is a moral and good life to lead, but they haven't always done it themselves.
Well, they don't have the same moral.
No, they don't. But we don't all have to be the same. We don't all have to be the same.
Why is it any different than reason?
I think reason's not to be trusted.
Amanda,
but the churches have. You've got a point.
Amanda, I'm going to cross to the other end of the panel. I'd like to hear what Susan Ryan has to say about this.
Well, I think that having a faith can inspire people to live very good lives. We have two examples here. I'm not sure about Amanda's status. You don't have to tell me what you're...
Give me a break.
You think she's
a good liberal.
But it's not the only. It's not the only thing. I mean, I know many people in my own family, Catholic nuns, priests, and so on, who live a life of altruism, which I, with my political philosophy, admire. But I agree with you, you don't need to have it. If it's there, you think, well, that's good. That's very fine. You're a Sister of Mercy who goes and works with the asylum seekers and so on. I really admire that. I respect it. I'll do what I can to help you. But there are other people who go and do similar good works from different motivation. So I would never knock someone's religious motivation. I would respect it when it was constructive and altruistic, but I can't see that you have to have that particular motivation. You don't have it, and these days I don't have it, and yet I hope we are pretty constructive people.
Let me bring in Fred, and we'll go back to Eddie Ozell's question, and really, do you want to have a crack at convincing the atheist of the existence of God?
Well, I was interested, you keep talking about reality and creation. I believe in reality. I believe in creation. When I see creation, I just thank God who created it, and I worship the Creator. You're in a vacuum. You don't know what you believe, what's there. So
No. Well,
He seems pretty clear to me.
No, in fact,
he doesn't know what he believes.
I try not to use the word belief because I try to not decide what the answer is before I've asked the question, and so I try to. In fact, I'm really happy about the fact that my faith is shakeable. I can think of something, I'm a physicist, and most of what I do is wrong. And that's exciting because it means nature is telling me something new. And that's what's so exciting about science is the fact that we can actually change our minds. Instead of deciding in advance what's right, as you claim to have done about homosexuality, in the face of all evidence. And so that to me is the real problem. Is that you have to be willing to change your mind.
So I'm going to just pause this argument just for a moment because we've actually got a question from Trish Ellis, and it does relate to what you were talking about a moment ago.
Lawrence Krauss, you were quoted as saying you want to intelligently design our society, our ethics and our morality so that we live in the kind of society we want to live in rather than in the kind of society that was laid down in the Bible. So if we get rid of God and make ourselves the God instead through our progress in technology and science, we should be a far better race of people. But in actual fact, we now have the ability to destroy ourselves through science. Einstein once wrote that science without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. They need and complement each other. How do you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I want to say is the quote you gave was not mine; it was my friend Richard Dawkins. But I think when we establish laws and government, we try and intelligently design society. We try laws and government in Australia as well as in my country, no matter what people say, are based on secular principles, okay? They're based on trying to organize people in a way to produce the maximum happiness, maximum comfort, etc. Now, I think that you're absolutely right that the products of science, the technology of science can be used in many different ways. But the point is that what we need to do is, if we're going to address the main problems of the 21st century, including the danger of nuclear weapons, we have to be honest about them. We have to be honest about things like the fact that the global warming is happening, and we have to deal with it instead of just deciding in advance what the problem is. So what we have to do is say, let's make our policies be based on empirical evidence. Wouldn't that be amazing if we made our public policy and government based on reality instead of ideology?
Lawrence, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I just bring you to the latter part of the question? Because Albert Einstein's not here on the panel, but Albert Einstein is the iconic genius. He clung to his belief.
He wasn't religious. You know, I didn't get to know him very well because he was dead before I was born. But he's been misused. His quotes have been misused completely. He derided a personal God more than anyone else. When he talked about religion, he talked about order in the universe, the God of Spinoza, whatever you want to talk about. He made it quite clear, as many people do, that their religious beliefs, because no matter what you say, science is certainly compatible with some vague notion of a purpose to the universe. We can't ever disprove that there's some purpose in the universe. There's just no evidence for one. But it is incompatible with the detailed doctrines of the world's major religions. And Einstein argued that as strongly as anyone else.
Okay, Gene Robinson, I mean, the quote still remains, if religion without science is blind, I think it was. That was a quote from Einstein, according to our questioner. What do you say?
Well, I like the quotation in the sense that it ties the two together. And I think either one by themselves can be distorted and incomplete. So for me, putting the two together is really important. Where I find science a kind of shortcoming is that science can describe what is and how it works, but there is much that is unprovable that is also important to me. So a scientist can tell me what makes a sunset colorful, how it works, how the curvature of the Earth affects it, but it doesn't tell me about beauty. It doesn't tell me about watching that sunset and being inspired by it. So I would say that the two together are very much important. I couldn't agree more with Lawrence about basing our policies and our public stances and so on the actual facts. And one of the things in America right now that just makes me crazy is that no one seems to think that the facts matter.
Yeah.
And we are getting into terrible trouble because of that.
But I'm going to interrupt because Fred
I'd just
wants
like
to
to challenge Lawrence that the greatest fact is the fact of Jesus Christ.
How do you know?
He's a reality, and he came into this world to show us the way of salvation, and he said in his own teaching,
he said he did?
who do you say that I am? So the question you have to ask, who was Jesus Christ? And what is his meaning? What is his meaning, his life, to you? And his death, you talked about the crucifixion. What does it mean for you?
Well,
and it's a source of salvation. He died for our sins.
When someone tells me they're God, I tend not to believe it. Okay, it's just
But have you studied?
Hold on.
Are you open-minded enough as
I'm
a
not
scientist
even sure he was real.
to study,
to tell you the truth.
to study Jesus Christ and to study the New Testament?
Well, can I just
are you open-minded enough? I just would like you to give me.
When I was a kid, I read.
Can I just put this? Can I just put this to you as a counterpoint? Are you open-minded enough to accept the Muslim position that Muhammad is the greatest man in history?
I don't believe he's the greatest man in history in the same way Jesus Christ was. Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
And that's because you've decided he is.
But that's factual history. You can actually study that.
Factual history?
There are documents, there are historical documents that show that.
That show what?
It's not
that
a
he
myth.
existed or that he's the Son of God?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Lawrence,
so
Muhammad certainly agreed that Jesus Christ was a great prophet. So we'll leave that aside for one moment. We've got a few other questions to go to. You're watching Q&A. The next question is a video question. It comes from James Mackay in Orange, New South Wales.
My question is to Mr. Nile. I have a terminal illness, motor neuron disease. Why did you not support the New South Wales Greens' rights of the terminally ill bill? By your actions, you have condemned me to a very painful, undignified death.
Well, thank you for the question, and obviously you are suffering, and I feel very sorry about that. But when we debated the euthanasia bill, as a Member of Parliament, I have a responsibility, if we had have passed that law, what effect it would have on people, aged people going into hospitals, would people feel at risk, would it change the nature of our doctors? Doctors are committed to saving life. We give them the power to take life. We change the nature of the doctor's role. And if we have hospitals where patients' lives can be taken as well, then we change the nature of a hospital. Instead of saving life, you could lose your life in hospital. And we've had reports from the Northern Territory where a lot of the Aboriginal people are very fearful of going to hospitals in the Northern Territory because of the possibility of euthanasia by a white, bigoted doctor who's racist, who would take the opportunity of removing numbers of the Aboriginal population. And that's what they've said to me. So I want to protect life. I want to protect you too and have the proper palliative care. You should not be suffering any pain in our modern society with all the knowledge we have of palliative care, all the experts we have, all the money that's being spent. You should not be suffering. And I'm sorry you are.
Susan Ryan.
Well, I think we should be talking about voluntary euthanasia, and I presume that was what was in the Greens bill. Voluntary euthanasia is something which philosophically I support and agree with. I do have some worries about the attempt to put it into legislation in this respect. I now come across a lot of examples of elder abuse. That's frail old people being abused by their families, sometimes for financial gain and so on. And I think we have to be very careful in getting voluntary euthanasia laws that make sure that the frail older person is well protected against those who would exploit that person. And one of the particularly difficult areas of this is that friends of mine who say that they want voluntary euthanasia, they want the right, are often saying it in relation to a discussion about Alzheimer's disease and dementia. But a problem I can't see my way around yet is that if a person has dementia, advanced dementia, then they're not in a position to make the voluntary decision. So somehow or other...
They can do it with an advanced medical directive.
Advanced directive?
Advanced medical directive. Look, I agree that the difficulty for legislators, I know plenty of people who philosophically agree, you should be able to say, I can't face this and I want to choose to end my life and I need help to do it in a dignified and decent way. You should be able to choose that. The problem for legislators is exactly as you say. You've got an old person who is very frail, who knows they're near their end, and they know that if they said see you later to the world, there'd be some assets so that the grandchild could, I don't know, go to university or whatever. I mean, kids can now, but you know what I mean. And there's pressure on someone to say, I want to give my life up. That is absolutely criminal and a terrible thing to allow. And how to devise a bill, as we've both had this experience, to exclude that, but give the rest of us the right we want to have, is the hardest part. And can I just say, it's not just the suffering. Look, you can get plenty of pills and poppers and stuff to stop. It's the indignity and the loss of the life that you were leading, that you're just breathing as someone else, not the person you were. It's not the pain that guy's complaining about. That's not all he's complaining about. He wants to end his life as he is, not as someone he's become because we wouldn't let him go when he wanted to.
Jean, let's hear from you on this.
So I would very much agree with Susan and Amanda on this. I think that part of a society's respect for each individual citizen includes this right to die with dignity. I also agree that we've got some thorny things to work through, certainly legislatively. I also remember that ethical choices are rarely between good and bad, but between two goods. And so knowing how to balance those two things, so both the protection and the freedom, is very complicated. But we can do it.
I'm going to go. Sure. Sorry, Lawrence, we've got one last question. It is actually to you. It comes from Chris Summers.
Hi, Lawrence. Hugh Svange. My question is this. Criticism of science by religious people is sometimes focused on a particular scientific theory. The multiverse theory has been criticised by religious people as an example of science having faith in a guess made without evidence at all in order to explain a mystery. It's been suggested that scientists have faith in their theory in the same way that religious people have faith in their God. So do scientists have evidence that are suggestive of a multiverse?
Can you give us a multiverse theory in 30 seconds? Is that possible?
Well, yeah, the difference between the multiverse and God is the multiverse is well motivated by evidence, okay? So we've been driven to it because of theories that actually do describe nature. And so those same theories can be tested. And so, in fact, just like we knew atoms existed before we could see them, okay, it is true that if there are many universes, we're subject, and in my own field, I'm constantly reminded that we're limited, that we live in one universe. Most of us do. The Republican Party in my country doesn't. And therefore, there are some questions we can't empirically test directly. But if, for example, we have a fundamental physics theory that makes 25 predictions, all of which agree with the data, and the 26th prediction is that in the early universe, those same physical processes would have resulted in an early expansion that would produce many different regions that are causally disconnected, there'd be no reason not to accept that fact. But the other huge difference is, however, that if there was any evidence against it, we'd throw it out like yesterday's newspaper. That's not the faith of religion. It's the fact that we make a theory, we test it, and we throw it out with impunity if it's wrong. And that's the hallmark of science.
Lawrence, I remember... Very briefly, because we're running out of time quite quickly, but I remember the last time you were on this show, we went back into the green room and I said to you, is it possible the multiverse, that is multiple universes, could have existed at the time of the Big Bang? And from memory, you said yes.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's quite, if you look at what we now know about fundamental physics, it's quite likely that our universe isn't unique. Almost all of the theories we have suggest our universe isn't unique. Now...
But at the same time, you argue that the Big Bang sprang from nothing. But it can't if there are multiple universes.
Oh, certainly it can. There was nothing there when there was absolutely no space, no time, no matter, no radiation. Space and time themselves popped into existence, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to...
But only in that universe.
Only in that universe. That's right.
Lawrence,
exactly.
You have to ask the question, why are the majority of scientists believers in God?
Actually, it's not true.
It is true. It is
country,
true. 90%, hold on.
90% of the scientists in the National Academy of Sciences in my country, the highest ranking group in the world, 90% of them don't believe in God. In the Royal Society, 80%.
All scientists.
In fact, the point. You know what? Again, some people think God is important to science. It isn't. The point is that, again, as Steve Weinberg said, most scientists don't think enough about God to even know if they're atheists. It never comes up because it's not relevant to trying to understand how the universe works. I've never heard it discussed in a scientific meeting. It's just not an issue. It's irrelevant.
There have been surveys.
Fred, I think I can help you with one thing at least, and that is that any God worth following wants converts, not conscripts. So religious people should stop looking to parliaments to conscript people in to a belief that they don't adopt.
Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. The laws of the universe have dictated that we're out of time. That's all we have time for on our panel tonight. Lawrence, please welcome our panel. Please thank our panel, I should say. Lawrence Krauss.
We'll go again.
We can start again in another universe. Amanda Vanstone, Gene Robinson, Fred Nile and Susan Ryan. Thank you. Thank you. Next Monday, we'll be joined by Canadian songstress Martha Wainwright, American environmentalist Bill McKibben, Financial Review editor Michael Stutchbury, renegade Liberal Senator Cory Bernardi, and writer and feminist historian Anne Summers. And make sure you tune in tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. for an extra edition of Q&A when Bill Gates, the world's richest man and most generous philanthropist, will face your questions. If you think you know everything about the geek who changed the world, think again. Now, just one more thing before we go. Q&A was 5 years old this week. No other program asks so much from its audience, so please accept our thanks for making Q&A work. We're having a great time here. And we'll leave you tonight with just a few of the highlights from the last 5 years. Until the Bill Gates Q&A tomorrow night at 8:30, good night. Good evening and welcome to the very first Q&A, what we like to call a new adventure in democracy where you get to ask the questions.
How big of a tool is Mark Latham?
My question doesn't actually go out to the panel tonight. It goes to this beautiful girl next to me. Will you marry me? And you can join the live Twitter conversation by following the hashtag, whatever that is, on your screen right now.
You're a parliamentarian in Australia who believes the world you live in is less than 10,000
I remain caught in the illusion of Maya ordinary reality. I perceive myself as an agent killing you.
What the fuck? Oh my god!
fucking lunatic.
What was a Facebook question? While Barry's just going to deal with his phone. That's probably your agent just wondering if that was a very good joke.
You've got a big ass, Julia. Just get on.
I'm just kidding. It's just the ABC crowd. I love it.
I would have expected more applause for a cheap one.
Should perhaps the Australian people consider charging you with treason?
No, we're not going to do that. Please.
And this is for the
Just someone.
Forget it.
Okay, you're watching.
Relax.
You've never considered it?
But forming a political party with Kevin.
Malcolm and I could never agree on the leadership.
So you and Julia couldn't either. Okay, you're watching Q&A. It's live and unusual.
With anything that's going to do this. Kick a dash.
Who said that?
So we'll take that as a comment.
Those were the days.
One brief example.